I'm Sean Lokes from Syngenta Ornamentals UK and Ireland. We're here today on a working nursery and we're going to be talking about thrips. And also we're going to be talking about the solution to thrips, a brand new insecticide for the ornamentals control market, Mainspring. Western flower thrips are a seriously damaging pest. They do up to £500 million worth of damage in Europe each year. So we know thrips are really damaging, but why is that the case? So they're an insect pest, so they're cold-blooded. So temperature is going to be something that really drives these pests. The higher the temperatures, the faster they can go through those life cycles. So when we're talking about an explosion of a population, one individual into the next generation, that process is going to go a lot faster the warmer it is. So if we're down at maybe 11 or 12 degrees, it's going to be very slow. And if you're up at 20 to 30 degrees, you could be down as low as 12 days from eggs all the way to adulthood. So you can get real telescoping of generations in a very short amount of time. So the warmer it is, the higher the thrip pressure could potentially be. And that's a really important thing to watch out for in a nursery situation, those high temperatures and making those crop walks potentially more frequent, because what might not have been a problem in the winter, and these are pests that can overwinter and can be ticking along in the right situation, is going to be much, much worse when we get to those really high summer temperatures, because they can just breed and breed and breed. When we think about the way thrip damage manifests itself, we just think about the life cycle again. So an egg is going to be laid, and then once that first instar emerges, it's essentially just feeding, and they're sort of sucking the early sort of layers of the cells on the top. So it's not like an aphid where it's going deep in and taking sap, it's really breaking on top, so it's rasping. So you'll see sort of silvery lines. You'll also see like black spots, and those are the kind of feces and frass that's produced while they're feeding. The higher population pressure you've got, the more damage you're going to get. And this is just like any other kind of insect pest. It's taking energy and resources away from the plant, and it makes them unmarketable in extreme situations, because the plant's got so little energy left. It's kind of can wilt, it doesn't look very good, it can get kind of sticky residues on it. So there's a lot of damaging effects that these thrips are having via just that feeding action. You can sort of also get secondary pests, infections, so things like botrytis can get into those open wounds, and thrips can also be vectors of viral plant diseases, which again can rip through a nursery in the wrong situation. So it's really important to get a good level of control. So when we talk about monitoring, that's a really important aspect of it. So things like the blue traps can be really useful. So any adult thrips are going to be attracted to those, they're going to land on those, and you can just monitor those regularly and see if they're there. It's not going to catch it at a very early infestation level, because your larval stages won't be winged adults, so they're not able to go onto the sticky traps. But as that infestation level starts to get higher, you'll be able to see them on the blue traps. You should still be able to see the younger stages in the crop. It can be difficult to see them. Adults will be more attracted and focused on flowers. So if you have a flower on a blank piece of paper, you can kind of tap a flower into that, and you'll be able to see adults in there if you've got an infestation that's high enough. Mainspring is an insecticide that can be a really important element of a thrip control program. So some elements of Mainspring that make it really useful are that it's a broad spectrum insecticide. It's got a unique mode of action in the ornamentals industry, and it's IPM compatible. It's also really fast acting, and we're going to talk about all those elements a little bit now. So in terms of mode of action, you're going to apply the product, the pests are going to take it up by consumption, so it's not a contact pathway, they're ingesting it, and then that's going to lead to paralysis of the pest, so they're no longer able to feed on the crop, so they're no longer able to cause damage to the crop. Okay, so to drill down into the science behind the active, what's happening there is that it's taken up in the digestive system, it's going into the muscle cells of the insects, and it's blocking the calcium channels. And because those calcium channels are no longer able to function properly, the muscle ends up being completely paralyzed. It's not able to function. So digestively they can't function, and they can't move around the crop as well. So when we talk about resistance management in insecticide programs, there's lots of different insecticides available. And the core of it is, when we have an insecticide, if we use that insecticide and then use other insecticides that are very similar to it, we're much more likely to get resistance to that insecticide. And something that's really exciting about Mainspring is that it's a very different type of insecticide. So it's in a very different IRAC group to all the other chemistries. It's unique in ornamentals in that sense. So it gives a really important tool for building into a resistance management program. And if we have really good resistance management programs, then all of our chemistries perform better, and we can keep them going for longer without problems with resistance. As with any application to a crop, we want to make sure we do a really good spray so that we can get as much coverage as we can. Now, thrips are something that's obviously very difficult to get at because they hide in cracks and crevices, but Mainspring does have translaminar activity, so it's going to be able to move a little bit in the leaf. So it's not going to be going all the way through the plant, but it is going to be able to move locally through the area, so the thrips are going to pick it up on the underside of a leaf if it's been missed in the spray. But again, the better you can make the spray, the better control you're going to get with the product. So when we're talking about using the product on nursery, it's really important that it's part of an IPM program, so integrated pest management, always at the forefront. And we've talked already about how the product is taken up via ingestion, so the thrips are going to be consuming the parts of the leaves that are treated, and they're taking those up. When we're talking about natural beneficials, the kind of things that we're buying in to deal with the pest populations and try and keep those populations in check, they're just going to be walking over the crop that we've treated, not ingesting it in the same way that the thrips are going to be. So they're not going to be affected in the same way. So it's going to be a lot softer on beneficials than it is to the pests that are consuming the plant, which makes it a really good partner in IPM programs. So we talked before about mode of action. What that means on the nursery is that after you've done your spray, you've applied your product, the thrips, about 5 minutes after ingesting it, are not going to be able to feed anymore, no longer able to do damage to your crop. And then within 24 to 48 hours, they're going to die. Mainspring also has 2 species of caterpillar on the label, the golden twin spot moth and beet armyworm. You don't need to add anything for the control of caterpillars like you do with thrips. You need to add sugars, not necessary for caterpillars. The product on its own does a really good job. In terms of mode of action, it's exactly the same for caterpillars as it is with thrips. You've got a treated crop, the caterpillar needs to consume treated material, and then within a few hours it's going to stop feeding, not do any more damage to the crop, and then within a few days the caterpillars should die. So you can see here a caterpillar trial where the untreated check, as you can see going through the timeline, they're consuming more and more of the leaf, and by the end of the period it's completely consumed and there's nothing left. And in the Mainspring treated one, over the same period, you can see that there's a tiny bit of consumption at the start, but the caterpillars have then taken on enough of the product that they don't do any further damage to the crop. So over the rest of that period, they're not doing any further damage to what we can see. And then we can see, whilst they don't die instantly, because the damage has stopped, that's the really important thing. And then within that time zone, they do go on to die. So some top tips for getting the most out of Mainspring in the nursery against thrips. Tip number 1 is definitely going to be make sure you get your application early as you can. The younger the thrips are when you apply, the more control you're going to get. You're going to get much better control at younger generations. Later generations are going to get harder and harder to control as it goes up. And tip number 2, really important one, add liquid sugar into the tank mix. So 125 to 250 millilitres of liquid sugar in with your mix with your water and your Mainspring. It's going to get much better control against thrips. And it's kind of frustrating to me that we don't know the exact reason why it helps, but we think it's because thrips are really good at hiding, and so then most of the sprays with contact insecticides, it's hard to get them, but actually the sugars being there makes them think that the plant's been damaged and there's sugars coming out of the leaves, so they're coming out and they're feeding on those treated areas. So we're not 100% on the reasons, but the evidence is clear in the efficacy. You get much better control if you include liquid sugar in your tank mix with Mainspring. Moving on to formulation, Mainspring comes as a WG, so it's a wettable granule, so it's something that disperses really easy in water. In as little as 10 seconds, even without agitation, it's going to go break down and be into solution. So really easy product to use. One of the benefits of this is we can put it with different partners. So we've talked about for thrips, the inclusion of liquid sugar. That's going to improve efficacy. With caterpillars, you don't need to add anything to it. It's going to work really well just as it is. So to summarize Mainspring for ornamental crop production, it's fast acting. And that's a really important point. When the pests take it on, they're not able to do any more damage to the crop, so it's going to stop the damage there. It's ingestion based, so they've got to consume it to have an effect. So if you're a beneficial insect walking over the top of the crop, you're not going to be infected in the same way, so it's really friendly to biologicals. It's got a unique mode of action, so it's the only type of chemical in ornamentals that we have in this class, so it's really good for resistance management programs. And if you want further information on the product, contact your technical area sales manager for ICL or speak to us at Syngenta.